The cry came from inside the forest and the whole village stopped. Not gradually. Not one person at a time. The whole village stopped simultaneously, the way a single organism stops when something reaches its central nerve: the women at the stream, the men under the mango tree, the children chasing each other through the compound, the old men sitting with their morning palm wine. Every head turned in the same direction. Toward the Oji forest. The sacred forest that sat at the eastern edge of Yumuk village like a dark thought at the back of a quiet mind. The forest where nobody went after sunset and most people did not go before it. The forest that the eldest of the elders said had been old when their grandparents were young. The forest that had its own rules and enforced them without appeal. From inside that forest came the cry of a newborn baby. Clear. Unmistakable. The specific high pure sound of a life that has just begun and has opinions about the beginning. Nobody moved. Nobody moved for a long time. And then one woman moved. She was the last person anyone expected. She was the woman the village had been calling Barren for 20 years. She was the woman whose name had become, in the particular cruelty of small communities, almost synonymous with the word empty. She was 44 years old and she had never carried a child to term, and the village had never allowed her to forget this, and she had never, not once, not in 20 years, stopped walking with her head up. Her name was Mama Chioma. And she walked into the forest alone. If you have ever watched the person everyone underestimated be the one to step forward, drop a comment below. And if you are new here, subscribe right now, because what Mama Chioma finds in that forest will shake this entire village to its roots. The story of Mama Chioma and Yumuk village was the story of a woman who had survived being defined. She had married Ikena Okafor at 24, a good marriage by the measures Yumuk used for measuring marriages. Ikena was steady, hardworking, a man who farmed his land with the diligence of someone who understood that the earth rewarded attention. He was not loud or showy. He came home every evening. He ate what was cooked and said it was good and meant it. He was, by the understanding of everyone in Yumuk who had opinions about these things, a good husband. The good husband and his wife had no children. In the first year, people said nothing, it was too early for comment, the comment would be premature, these things took time. In the second year the comments began but were gentle, wrapped in the soft packaging of concern. Have you tried this herb? Have you visited that prayer house? My cousin's wife had a similar situation on. By the 5th year the packaging was thinner. By the 10th year it had been removed entirely. That Chioma, the empty one. Ikena should have taken another wife years ago. It is not normal, 20 years and nothing. Something is wrong with her. And the one that was said less loudly but meant the most, she brought the barrenness with her. It is in her family. Mama Chioma heard every word. Yumuk was not a large village and sound traveled the way it travels in small places, completely, and without the courtesy of reaching only the intended ears. She heard them and she held them and she did not fold. Not because she was not hurting. She was hurting in a way that had no good description, the specific grief of wanting something with your whole body and watching years pass without it arriving, combined with the additional grief of a community that treated your private pain as public evidence of your inadequacy. She hurt. But she held herself upright with the particular posture of someone who has decided that the opinions of people who do not love them will not be allowed to determine their shape. Ikena held her too. This was the thing people in Yumuk did not fully account for when they constructed their narrative about Mama Chioma, Ikena. He had been offered, indirectly and directly, the option of a second wife. He had been told, by his mother and his uncle and 2 members of the kindred, that nobody would blame him. He had been presented with the cultural framework and the social permission and the willing participants. He had said no. Every time. Not loudly. Not with a speech. Just no, said with the quiet finality of a man who had decided something once and saw no reason to keep deciding it. She is my wife, he said to his uncle once, when the pressure had been particularly direct. Not my wife until she produces children. My wife. His uncle had looked at him with the expression of someone watching a man make a mistake they will understand later. Ikenna had gone home and told Chioma what he had said. She had not cried. She had made his dinner and put it in front of him and sat across from him and said, "You are a foolish man." He had looked at her. "Foolish and good," she said. "Both things." He had eaten his dinner. 20 years had passed like this, the village with its opinions and Chioma and Ikenna with their marriage, which was not the marriage the village had planned for them but which was, by the measurement of two people who actually lived inside it, sufficient. The morning the cry came from the forest was the morning of the New Yam festival. Yumuk celebrated it the way they had been celebrating it for longer than anyone could trace, with food and palm wine and the gathering of the kindred and the presence of everyone who belonged to the village whether they currently lived there or not. People came from the city. People came from Enugu and Lagos and Abuja, returning for this specific weekend to the specific coordinates of their origins. The compound was full. Mama Chioma had been cooking since before sunrise. This was her role in the festival. She cooked for the family gathering with the efficiency and skill of someone who had been doing it for 2 decades, and she did it without resentment, which surprised people who expected her to resent it. She did not resent it because she understood that resentment is a weight you carry and she had decided what she was willing to carry and resentment was not on the list. She was at the outdoor fire, stirring the large pot of ofe onogbu, when the cry came. She heard it before anyone else heard it because she was already outside and because this was the part she could not explain later. She had been listening for something all morning without knowing what she was listening for. The way you sometimes listen before you know there is something to hear. The cry came. She heard it. And she moved. "Chioma." Ikenna's voice behind her, sharp. "Chioma, where are you going?" She did not stop. "The forest." "Nobody goes into the Oji forest." "I am going." "Chioma," he was beside her now, walking fast to keep up. "The elders have not decided anything." "We wait for the elders." She stopped. She turned and looked at her husband. "A baby is crying in a forest," she said. "The elders will have a meeting about it. They will discuss. They will bring out palm wine and pour libation. They will send for the dibia. The dibia will come tomorrow. The meeting will happen the day after." She looked at him steadily. "There is a baby in the forest, Ikenna. What does it need?" He looked at her. "Now," she said. "Not when the meeting decides." She turned and kept walking. Behind her, she heard him follow. He always followed. The forest at the edge of Yumuk was not a forest you entered casually. Even the children who were too young to understand the full weight of the prohibition felt it, some quality of the air at the tree line, some change in temperature or light or sound that the body registered as a boundary and respected instinctively. The trees at the edge were old and large, their roots above ground in places, their canopy dense enough that the morning light that existed everywhere else in Yumuk was simply absent inside the tree line. Mama Chioma walked through it. She walked toward the sound, which she could still hear. The cry was continuous, which meant the child was alive, and continuous crying was what kept her moving when every other part of her understanding said to wait. Ikenna walked behind her. Neither of them spoke. The forest received them in the way that old things receive the presence of humans, not welcoming exactly, but not hostile either. Simply aware. The awareness of something that has been here long enough to have an opinion about visitors but too long to be surprised by them. The cry was closer. She moved faster. She found the child in a place she would never be able to describe precisely to anyone who asks, a small clearing that she could not have found again if she tried, that other people who went looking afterward could not locate, that seemed to exist in the Oji forest according to its own rules about existence. The ground in the clearing was soft and the light that reached it was different from the light in the rest of the forest, warmer, more deliberate. In the center of the clearing, wrapped in cloth that had no business being as white as it was inside a forest, was a baby. A girl. Newborn, minutes old, perhaps, certainly no more than hours. Still with the look of someone who has just arrived from somewhere and has not fully committed to the destination yet. Her cry had been large for her size, and when Mama Chioma appeared at the edge of the clearing it stopped, as if the crying had been for exactly this purpose, to summon exactly this person, and the purpose being accomplished, the crying was no longer required. The silence was absolute. Mama Chioma stood at the edge of the clearing. She looked at the child. The child looked back with the unfocused but strangely specific gaze of the newborn. And something happened in Mama Chioma's chest that she would spend the rest of her life trying to describe and never fully succeeding. The closest she ever came was this: it was as if something that had been absent for 44 years was suddenly present. Not arrived, present. As if it had always been there, waiting, and had simply now chosen to make itself known. She crossed the clearing. She picked up the child. The child was warm. She held her against her chest, and the child's crying did not resume, and the forest was very still, and Ikenna appeared at the edge of the clearing and stopped. He looked at his wife holding a child in the middle of a sacred forest in the morning light. He did not speak for a long time. Then he said, "Is she alive?" "She is alive," Mama Chioma said. "She is. She is real, Ikenna. She is here, and she is warm, and she is real." He crossed the clearing. He stood beside his wife and looked at the child in her arms. "What do we do?" he said. "We take her home," Mama Chioma said. "The elders. The elders can come to us." Her voice was not defiant. It was the voice of someone stating a fact that has already been settled. "We take her home. She needs warmth. She needs feeding. She needs what a child needs. The elders need what elders need. These things can happen at the same time." Ikenna looked at his wife for a long moment. Then he nodded. They walked out of the forest. The village was waiting at the tree line. Not everyone, people had dispersed when Mama Chioma went in, had gone back to the festival or retreated to their compounds to wait and discuss and do the things that people do when something unusual is happening and the unusual thing is happening to someone else. But enough people. Enough people to constitute an audience. They saw Mama Chioma emerge from the Oji forest. They saw what was in her arms. The silence that fell was different from the silence when the cry came. The first silence had been surprise. This silence was something else, the silence of an entire community's narrative about a woman being challenged in a single visible moment. Mama Nuis, who was 78 and had lived in Yumuk longer than most people remembered and who had been one of the more consistent voices on the subject of Chioma's barrenness, stood at the front of the gathered people. She looked at Chioma. She looked at what was in Chioma's arms. She said nothing. Mama Chioma walked past her. She walked through the gathered people without stopping, without looking left or right, with the unhurried steps of a woman going home with something that needed to be home. Ikenna walked beside her. Nobody stopped them. The elders came that afternoon. All 7 of them, with the Dibia who was the spiritual authority on matters involving the Oji forest, and they filled the small parlor of Chioma and Ikenna's home and looked at the child who was now sleeping in a borrowed cloth on a mat, fed with the careful improvisation of a woman who had prepared nothing for this and managed everything anyway. Motsi Obiora, the oldest of the elders, spoke first. "This child came from the Oji forest," he said. Not a question. "Yes," Chioma said. "You entered the forest alone." "My husband followed." Motsi Obiora looked at Ikenna, who nodded once. "The Oji forest does not welcome visitors," Motsi Obiora said. "The forest received us," Chioma said simply. "If it did not welcome us, it had the means to make that clear." The elders exchanged glances. The Dibia had not spoken. He was looking at the sleeping child with an expression that was not readable in the ordinary way of expressions. It was the face of someone reading something that is not written in a language that translates simply. He spoke. "This child was placed," he said. His voice was quiet and the room became quieter to accommodate it. "Not abandoned. Not lost. Placed." "By whom?" Motsi Obiora asked. "By the forest," he said. "By whatever the forest serves. I cannot tell you more than that because that is the limit of what can be told." He looked at Chioma. "I can tell you who it was placed for." The room was completely still. Is looked at Chioma for a long moment. "A child who has been held in waiting requires someone who has been waiting," he said. "The forest knows these things." Mama Nuis, who had come with the elders, was sitting at the back of the room. She had not spoken. She did not speak now. But her face was doing something it had not done in 20 years of delivering opinions about Chioma's empty womb. It was uncertain. It was the face of a woman whose framework for understanding something has been removed and who has not yet built a replacement. The process that followed was long. The elders deliberated for 3 days. The Dibia performed the consultations that his role required. The village had opinions at every stage. Some people certain that the child must be returned to the forest, some people certain that the child was a gift that could not be returned, some people certain that Chioma specifically should not be the one to keep the child, for reasons that were framed as spiritual but were not entirely separate from 20 years of calling her Barren. Chioma attended none of the deliberations. She was at home with the child. She fed her and held her and learned, in the accelerated crash course of necessity, the things she had never had occasion to learn. She was not a woman who had spent 20 years longing with her arms empty. She was a woman who had accepted the shape of her life and built something real inside it. But the child in her arms was also real, and the warmth of the child was also real, and the specific weight of a living person who had been found in a forest by the one woman who walked in when everyone else stood still. This was real in a way that needed no deliberation to establish. Ikena sat with her in the evenings. On the second evening he said, "What will you call her?" "The elders have not decided." "I am not asking the elders. I am asking you." She looked at the sleeping child. "Oji," she said. "For where she came from." Ikena looked at the child. "Oji," he said. Testing the sound of it. "The forest is not evil," Chioma said. "People are afraid of it and fear makes things into what fear needs them to be. The forest gave us this child. I will not name her something that erases where she came from." Ikena nodded slowly. "Oji," he said again. The child, sleeping, moved slightly in the cloth. The elders returned on the 4th day. Motsi Obiora sat across from Chioma and Ikena, and he was old enough and honest enough to say what he said without performing it. "We have consulted. We have prayed. We have heard what the Dibia says and what the ancestors say through the Dibia." He paused. "The child stays. With you. Both of you." He looked at Chioma directly. "The Oji forest has made a decision that is above our decision. We can only honor it." Chioma said nothing. "There are those in this village," Motsi Obiora continued, "who have said things about you for 20 years that they will now have to account for. Not to me. Not to the kindred." He paused. "To themselves. I do not need their accounting," Chioma said. "I know," the old man said. "But they would do it anyway. That is what happens when the thing you said about a person is directly contradicted by what the world shows you." He looked at his hands. "The world has shown us something about you, Chioma. The world has shown you something about patience," she said. "That is all." Mama Nuis came alone on the 5th day. Not with the elders. Alone, at an hour when the compound was quiet, with the careful movement of someone who has prepared something difficult. Chioma opened the door. They looked at each other. "I have come," Mama Nuis said. I see you, Chioma said. A long silence. I said things, Mama Nui said. Yes. For many years. Yes. Mama Nui looked at her hands. She was 78 years old and she had been certain about many things for 78 years, and the certainty had given her life a structure that was comfortable, and she was now standing at a door where the structure had been moved and she did not know what to put in its place. I was wrong, she said. She said it the way very old people who have been very certain say they were wrong completely, because there is no longer any point in the partial version. Chioma looked at her for a long moment. Come and see her, she said. Mama Nui came inside. She sat beside the mat where Oji was sleeping. She looked at the child for a long time. From the forest, she said quietly. From the forest, Chioma confirmed. I have lived in this village for 78 years, Mama Nui said. I have never known the Oji forest to give a child. It had not met the right person, Chioma said simply. Mama Nui looked at her. Something passed between the two women that was not forgiveness exactly, and not its absence either. Something more complicated than either, the acknowledgement of a long wrong and the decision, made in real time, about what to do with the acknowledgement. She is beautiful, Mama Nui said. Yes, Chioma said. She is. Oji grew up in Umuk knowing two things with equal certainty. The first was that she had come from the Oji forest, which she was told by her mother from the age she could understand stories, and which she received not with confusion or shame but with the particular pride of a child who has been told their origin is unusual and has decided that unusual is a good thing to be. The second was that she was wanted. Not just loved, wanted. Wanted in the specific way of someone who has been found, who has been walked into a forest for, who has been held against a chest that had been waiting even when it did not know what it was waiting for. She grew up knowing she was wanted, and this knowing shaped her the way foundation shapes a building, not always visible but present in everything that stood on top of it. Mama Chioma watched her grow with the attention of someone for whom no moment of the growing was unremarkable. She watched her learn to walk and talk and ask questions and form opinions and decide who she was, and she watched all of it with the particular attention of a woman who had waited long enough to know that presence was not something to waste. She did not talk much about the 20 years. Not because they had not happened. Because they had happened and had been survived and had produced, in the strange alchemy of time and endurance, this child, this morning, this compound, this life. When people asked her, in the years after, how she had done it, how she had walked into the forest when everyone else stood still, she always said the same thing. A baby was crying, she said. What else do you do when a baby is crying? What else do you do? As if the answer was obvious. As if courage was simply the absence of a reason not to act. As if 20 years of holding yourself upright under the weight of a village's opinions was simply what you did while you waited for the morning the forest would call your name. There is a kind of waiting that is not passive. There is a kind of endurance that is not survival, it is preparation. It is the long work of remaining yourself while the world attempts to define you as something smaller. Mama Chioma waited for 20 years. She did not break. She did not fold. She did not let the village's word for her become her word for herself. And on a festival morning, when a sound came from a place where sounds were not supposed to come, she was the only one ready to walk toward it. That is not coincidence. That is what 20 years of holding yourself together produces. That is what refusing to be defined by what has not yet arrived produces. It produces a woman who can walk into a sacred forest alone. It produces a woman the forest recognizes. It produces a child named Oji, sleeping in a borrowed cloth, warm and found and wanted. If this story reached somewhere in you that needed reaching, share it right now with someone who is in their own season of waiting. Drop a comment and tell us what you are holding on for. Like this video so more people find this story. And if you are not yet subscribed, do it now, because every week we bring you a story about the people who waited and the morning their waiting was answered. The next story is already here. Do not miss it.